Good morning, friends, and welcome back to this channel. I would like to remind you to please give me a thumbs up because the new algorithm has changed on YouTube and it wants interaction. If there's no interaction, then the algorithm would say to the people this video is not good and it won't be spread. Also, please subscribe to this channel. It's not going to cost you anything. It's just a button that you click, and afterwards, if you get tired of this channel, you can always unsubscribe. You can just hit the subscribe button and that's it. Nothing else is going to happen. It's just going to help my numbers grow, because at the moment I see I get up to 80 views a time for every video, but only 18 people have subscribed to my channel yet. So if you won't mind, just press that subscribe button. It will really help this channel out, and I would really like to spread the word much further and wider than it is currently going. Anyway, welcome to chapter 6 breakdown. Now, as you've noticed, I'm sure you've noticed the time, it's a bit long. I would ask you to please bear with me. There is a lot to say. You cannot believe in such a short chapter how much information there is and how much topics there are to speak about. So hopefully it will give you some bit of an insight. Hopefully it will give you something to think about, and maybe give you even some answers that you might have questions for. Anyway, here we go. Enjoy the video. Remember, cheers, guys. Okay, guys, let us look at our first question. Who was the sons of God? So Genesis 6 verse 1 to 4 introduces a mysterious group called the sons of God, who took wives from amongst the daughters of man, resulting in the birth of the Nephilim. This short but dense passage has sparked centuries of debate. Here are the three main interpretations of who the sons of God were. Number 1. Fallen angels, supernatural beings. This is the oldest and most traditional view, found in ancient Jewish writings. The sons of God were angelic beings who left their proper domain, lusted after human women, and had children with them. Now, to support this, you can look at the phrase sons of God. In Hebrew, B'nai Ha-Elohim appears elsewhere in the Old Testament. For example, in Job 1 verse 6, 2 verse 1, 38 verse 7, and clearly refers to angels. Jude 6 to 7 and 2 Peter 2 verse 4 to 5 seems to allude to this event, describing angels who sinned and were punished. Jesus says angels don't marry in Matthew 22 verse 30, though the reference to angels in heaven, not necessarily rebellious ones. It introduces supernatural offspring, which some finds theologically troubling. The second view is that it could have been from the line of Seth. This became the dominant view amongst church theologians after the early centuries, especially from Augustine onwards. Sons of God refers to the godly lineage of Seth, while daughters of men refers to the ungodly line of Cain. The intermarriage led to moral corruption. It fits with the broader biblical theme of keeping godly lines separate, keeps the narrative human, and avoids supernatural elements. Now, some of the criticism with that is that the term sons of God is never used elsewhere in the Old Testament to describe humans in this way. It doesn't explain why their union would produce Nephilim, mighty beings or giants. Then there's the royalty or nobility view. The sons of God were powerful human rulers who took women by force, possibly through polygamy or abuse of power. Ancient Near Eastern kingdoms sometimes called themselves sons of God, and it may explain the lawlessness and violence in the world at that time. Like the Sethian view, it doesn't clearly explain the Nephilim. This reading is more speculative and less supported by other biblical uses of the term. So my final thoughts on this is that many biblical scholars today lean towards the angelic interpretation, especially when taking into account how Jewish and early Christian writers read the passage. However, the Sethian view remains popular amongst those who prefer to avoid supernatural explanations. When we read the chapter further, it says that God will not dwell within man for much longer, and his days will be 120 years. So does that refer to how long humans will live? Or does that refer to the time that the flood will come? So the phrase, his days shall be 120 years, appears in Genesis 6 verse 3, and like much of Genesis 6, it has sparked debate. Let's break down the two main interpretations. The verse Genesis 6 verse 3, then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. Now there's two main interpretations to this. 120 years could be the countdown to the flood. This is the most widely accepted view among scholars, meaning God is giving humanity 120 more years before he brings judgment through the flood. It fits the context of Genesis 6, which is about God's grief over human wickedness. Noah is later told to build the ark, and the timeline fits with the grace period of mourning. And the Hebrew phrasing allows for it to refer to the time remaining, not lifespan. So in summary, we could say it is the grace period and not the new human age limit. Now the second view is 120 years for human life, meaning God is shortening the average human lifespan to 120 years. Now to support this is that after the flood, lifespans gradually decreased, though not immediately. Today the longest verified human lifespan doesn't go much beyond 120. So several people lived longer than 120 years after the statement. For example, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. The context of Genesis 6 is not focused on aging, but on judgment and corruption. So for this reason, the 120 years is best understood as a countdown to the flood, a period of patience where God gives humanity time to repent before judgment falls. It reflects God's mercy and warning before justice, which fits beautifully with the message of Genesis 6 as a whole. And they were giants in those days, and also after. Genesis 6 verse 4 says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans, and had children by them. This verse clearly says that the Nephilim were on the earth not just before the flood, but also afterwards. This raises a very good question, doesn't it? Because if the flood wiped out everyone and everything, except for Noah and his family, how did the Nephilim appear after the flood? So let's break this down. Who were the Nephilim afterwards? We actually see them later in the Bible, especially in Numbers 13 verse 33, where they said, we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Here the Israelite spies report seeing Nephilim in Canaan, describing them as giants. So how did they survive the flood? So here are three main theories to think about. Option 1. A second occurrence of the sons of God incident. So after the flood, other fallen angels may have repeated the sin of Genesis 6, taking human wives again. This would explain how Nephilim appeared afterwards. In Genesis 6 verse 4 it says, and also afterwards, implying this unnatural union could have happened more than once. Now the pro for this is that it fits a literal reading of Nephilim as hybrid beings, but the con is that it doesn't explain why the second event isn't described in detail in the Bible. Option 2. Nephilim genes survived through Ham's wife. Some speculate that one of Noah's daughters-in-law carried Nephilim blood in her ancestry. In this view, the giant clans like Anakim, Rephaim, etc. are distant descendants. Now to support this, it could explain why Nephilim show up after the flood without needing another angelic incursion. It doesn't require a second angelic rebellion, but the Bible doesn't say anything about the wife's lineage, so this is speculative. Option 3. The spies were exaggerating. In Numbers 13, the Nephilim are also mentioned by the fearful spies, not by God or Moses. This might be hyperbole. They were scared and exaggerated, calling large warriors Nephilim, which seemed like grasshoppers, shows emotional exaggeration. It avoids supernatural complications, but doesn't explain why the same giant clan, like Anakim and Rephaim, etc., are treated seriously in other texts, like Deuteronomy and Joshua. So to summarize this, we can say that Genesis 6 verse 4 says that Nephilim were there and also afterwards. And the Bible later mentioned giants like the Anakim and Rephaim who were very real threats to Israel. So these are the two main possibilities. Either there was another angelic human corruption after the flood, or giant traits survived through human bloodlines, especially through Ham's descendants in Canaan. Either way, the Bible shows that giant clans re-emerged after the flood and were major obstacles in Israel's conquest of Canaan. In Genesis 6 verse 6 it says, "And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart." So what does the word regret actually mean in the ancient Hebrew text? The word is nisham, which can mean to be sorry, to feel sorrow or grief, or to change one's mind or relent, depending on the context that you use it in. It's not saying God made a mistake like a human would. It's saying God felt deep sorrow over what humanity had become. He was grieved, and not because his plan failed, but because sin had defiled his creation and hurt the creatures he loved. This shows us God's emotional connection to his creation. He's not distant, he's inverted, and sin causes him real grief. So you would probably be wondering, okay, but why did God let Cain live? Because I'm sure if Cain was killed, the whole line of Cain wouldn't have existed. Thereby, there wouldn't be any violence, and the earth would not have gone the way it has gone. In Genesis 4 verse 13 to 15, Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear." But the Lord said, "If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken to him sevenfold." And the Lord put a mark on Cain. God spared Cain even though he committed the first murder. But why? These are the possible reasons. Number 1, mercy. Even though Cain was guilty, God extended mercy, a core part of his character. Number 2, free will. So God allowed humans to make choices, even bad ones, rather than turning them into programmed beings. Number 3, judgment delayed, not denied. While Cain lived, his line would later be wiped out in the flood. Evil was not overlooked, just delayed in judgment. And then the 4th, there was a greater plan. God allowed sin to play out so he could fully reveal his justice and eventually his redemptive plan through Jesus. So would killing Cain have prevented evil? It's tempting to think if Cain had been destroyed, his evil descendants like Lamech wouldn't have existed. But remember one thing, evil didn't come from Cain. Every human has the capacity to sin. Even Noah, who found favor, would later stumble. Sin is not just a bloodline issue. It's a heart issue. God didn't destroy Cain to preserve free will and to demonstrate mercy, but he still judged wickedness in the flood when humanity universally turned to violence. So here's my final thought on this. God did grieve over mankind's sin, but that doesn't mean he made a mistake. Instead, it shows his deep love, his patience, and his reluctance to destroy what he had made. His ultimate plan was not just to judge sin, but to redeem humanity through Christ. We also read in Genesis 6 verse 9 that God didn't just intend to destroy humans, but also the animals. So now you're wondering, what did the animals ever do? Why not just destroy the humans outright and let the animals live? So Genesis 6 verse 7, so the Lord said, "I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animal, and creeping things and birds of the heaven, for I am sorry that I have made them." God includes animals in a judgment. And here are some possible reasons why. Number 1, creation was linked together. When man fell, all creation suffered. Genesis 1 and 2 shows that humans were the caretakers of creation. When humans sinned, the ground was cursed. Sin didn't just affect people, it corrupted the entire ecosystem under their stewardship. In Romans 8 verse 20 to 22, it explains that even more clearly. For the creation was subjected to futility, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay. In other words, when mankind fell, creation fell with them. Option 2. Animals were tainted by human violence. Genesis 6 verse 11 to 12 says, "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence." Not just humans, but the whole earth was corrupt. Some scholars interpret this to mean that animal behavior may have been affected. Possibly some unnatural mixing was happening, like for example through fallen angels and genetic corruption, or the dominions God gave to man had been so misused that everything under it became twisted. Option 3. God still preserved a remnant of animals. It's important to remember that God didn't wipe out animals completely. He commanded Noah to take pairs of every animal into the ark. For clean animals, he even commanded 7 pairs. So, while judgment came, God preserved life for a new beginning. This shows that the destruction wasn't random. It was part of a reset that would allow God's creation to flourish again in a cleansed world. The flood is a picture of ultimate judgment and ultimate mercy. In judgment, God deals with sin. But in mercy, God saves a remnant, both of people, which is Noah's family, and animals. The flood is a shadow of both wrath and grace. God destroyed the animals not because they sinned, but because they were part of a corrupted creation under mankind's dominion. The whole earth was filled with violence, likely affecting all life, and God intended a new beginning, and preserving only the righteous remnant, like Noah and some of the animals. It's a sobering story, but it ultimately points forward to God's greater work of redemption through Jesus, where He doesn't just cleanse the world temporarily, but restores all creation forever. Revelations 21 verse 5. The rest of the chapter is actually quite straightforward. This is where Noah was told how to build the ark. So for you guys out there that is very curious like me, that wanted to know how much is a cubit? Well, here is the answer. A cubit was an ancient unit of measurement based on the length of a forearm, from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger. Most scholars believe that Genesis 6 likely used a common cubit, which was around 45 centimeters or 0.45 meters, since it was the general measurement standard across the ancient Near East. That means that the ark was 135 meters long, 22.5 meters wide, and 13.5 meters high. Anyway guys, that is then our entire breakdown for chapter 6. So I hope you liked this video. I hope you actually learned something. I hope some of these points make sense to you and that it would give you a bit more clarity. Once again, this is my interpretation of how I see things and how I read it. So it's not set in stone, it's not facts, because none of us were there, so we can't say this is what it was. But I'm trying to keep it as commonsensical, if I can put it like that, as possible. So again, this was my interpretation of Genesis 6. So remember guys, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up please. The algorithm has changed. I see even now I get up to 70-80 views per video, but I only have 18 subscribers. Come on guys, it doesn't cost you anything just to press that subscription button. It's not going to cost you money. If you don't like the rest of the content, you can always unsubscribe later on. I just need to grow the numbers so I can grow the channel. And then yeah, our next chapter will be Genesis chapter 7, Genesis chapter 7, and that will be the flood. So yeah guys, whatever you do, keep it safe, and until next time, God bless you. Cheers.